response. Welcome again, everybody. So we are now beginning our 8th panel, Global Phenomenon Requires a Global Response. We do have 5 speakers today, so we are a little bit tight on the time. I will ask you to have 10, maximum 12 minutes to your presentations. I know this is very tight, but it's so that we can have a little bit of timing for the Q&A. I think it's the most interesting and most engaging part in this session. I will just present the names and the institutional affiliations of the speakers. So we will begin by following the order of the panel with Saif Rasul Khan from the Gauhati University. The presentation will be on transnational surrogacy migration in Eurasia, expansion in global south. So Saif, welcome. Thank you for being here. I will give you now the floor and ask you to be within the 12 minutes timing. Okay, thank you so much.
Sorry, Anna and Saif. If it's okay with Saif, can I start, please?
I was just checking this now on the chat. I'm really sorry, Saif. Don't you if you don't mind?
Right, no worries. No worries.
Okay.
If it's okay with Saif, then I will start.
Okay, so let's begin with Emrah Atar from Cesran International and Recep Tayyip Erdogan University, presenting a SWOT analysis of international politics of climate change. Go ahead, Emrah.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you very much for letting us to be here and be part of this organization. So today I'm going to talk about the SWOT analysis of international politics of climate change. You know that political turmoil, civil wars, hunger, droughts, water wars, and international migrations are some of the issues that we are facing in the 21st century, and we are struggling with these issues nowadays. Why not all of these problems are directly linked to global warming or climate change? The impact of global warming is more than one's anticipation in such issues. Migration, for example, I can give an example. While more is more known to be linked to the civil war and economic reasons, there are an increased number of migrants whose emigration derives from environmental and climate reasons. So although recognizing the importance of climate change and the need to collaborate against it has attracted increased attention worldwide nowadays, political ideology, national interest, also prevent this problem from being resolved more drastically. So there have been many initiatives related to climate change and global warming in the international area, of course. For example, the framework of Convention on Climate Change, which is considered as the first of the steps taken in the international area, and the Kyoto Protocol, we all know that, signed on 97 within the framework of the convention, which appears as an agreement that envisaged 5% of reduction in greenhouse gas emission of developed countries. With the expression of this protocol in 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed by 197 countries to prevent the climate crisis. Also, United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development can be considered as a universal development point for this kind of actions. So when we look at the environmental issues that's caused because of global warming or climate change, we can see that a lot of pollution of drinking, pollution of rivers, lakes, and contamination of soil and water by toxins, ocean and beach pollution, loss of natural habitat for wildlife, air pollution, damage to Earth's ozone layer, loss of tropical rainforest, acid rains, urban sprawl, floods, this kind of many environmental issues that we can consider in this context. So the climate change continues to be global. We know that because in this research I focused on global climate change. When these studies are scrutinized, one of the most imperative factors in the increasing the adverse effect of climate change is, of course, human beings. So this same, when we look at that on climate change, the Earth's average temperature is already more than 1 centigrade above pre-industrial levels. The last 5-year period has been the warmest 5 years on record. You can see that every year we talk, this year is going to be the warmest year, this year is going to be warmer year. So the world is getting warmer than warmer every year. Like I said, because of the climate change, we have more frequent heat waves, rising sea levels, problems with water availability, and increased flooding problems worldwide. So in spite of the all of this evidence at hand, climate change remains the toughest, most intractable political issue that we as a society have ever faced currently. This is not to say that there hasn't been progress. Of course, there are many policies that focus on this issue, but is it enough? Of course not. We have to be careful and give more attention on this issue in political side of this administrative way. So in this study, I tried to make a research on to analyze a SWOT analysis of this issue. So I will focus on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of this issue. So we will start with strengths. For example, I'm not going to give information for all because otherwise it will be too much. So I will choose some. International concern about climate change is a good strength for politicians or politics who is working on this kind of issues. So the globe is immune from the devastating consequences of climate change. So rising temperatures are fueling environmental degradation. So it is clear that business as usual is not good enough as well. That's why people are an international concern about climate change is rising day by day. I can say that clearly. Societal acceptance and trust is rising in global as well. Successful climate change mitigation and adaptation, of course, depends on public trust and experts as well. That's why this is a good point to start your policies. So social acceptance and trust is a good strength for politicians to focus on this kind of issues. Burden sharing at local and global levels, and of course with different actors. It can be NGOs, public, private sectors as well. Because it is critical that the fact that climate change often is reduced to a question of lowering emission of greenhouse gases, and by implication that burden sharing and international cost allocation. Burden sharing means maybe money as well. So international cost allocation is a good question to start. Because of this social acceptance and international concern about climate change, governments and international organizations, NGOs, private organizations are trying to work together, and there is space for these organizations to work together. That's why I put this one as a strength. Maybe you can consider this one as a threat or weaknesses as well. But because of last decade's attempts on climate change, I put this one as a strength. The world woke up to climate change. This is also related to another one. So before that, we have growth of renewable energy. Renewable energy using is increasing worldwide, so people are more focused on renewable energy nowadays. The world woke up to climate change is also related to international concern, social acceptance, and if we have all of this, we will keep people informed on climate change, global warming, and the other environmental issues as well. When we look at the weaknesses, the complexity is the most important one for me, because the issue of climate change usually fits into various sectors. That's why there is a complexity in this area. Integration of climate change policies into other policy areas. It's a complexity for politicians or for politics or for NGOs, for private sectors. Therefore, this problem, this complexity is difficult, and this can be a weakness for on this issue. Targeting of climate activities, another one. We have justification and accountability, collective actions, and trust, imaginations. I wanted to give some information about targeting of climate activities because this one is important to me. Climate and environmental activities, including increasingly those defending woodlands against the logging industry, have been killed or threatened in several countries. We have seen that, such as Colombia, Brazil, Philippines. We have seen this in news as well. So the highest killing of this kind of activities was 2019, just 2 years ago. That's why I think this was one of the most significant weaknesses of this kind of activities. Data accessibility is another important weaknesses, because we don't have enough data to focus on the issues. That's why climate scientists around the world are contributing to simulation models of the future climate. They are still trying because of the lack of data currently we have. Logistic difficulties is another one. Logistics means, you know, it's, we all know what it means, but the transport sector is responsible for more than 26% of greenhouse gas emission, and it means a lot of money for these people. That's why they are trying to make it harder for people to come some solution on climate change. When we look at the opportunities, we have building infrastructure to reduce climate. It's important because we have clear evidence that we are in a race against time to adapt to a rapidly changing climate. So that's, if you want to get rid of this kind of problems, or if you want to mitigate the circumstances, we need to build buildings or make some good infrastructure to reduce climate change. Buildings against heat waves, buildings against drought, buildings against coastal flooding and sea level rise, buildings against cold. This kind of buildings will be an opportunity. We have opportunity to build our next generation in this direction. Increasing societal awareness of climate change phenomena is another one. The reason why climate change is an issue in the first place, because it is cascading effect not only on our environment but also on our society. That's why societal awareness is another opportunity for us. like I said, international concern about climate change. I mentioned this one before. Another good one is youth movement. We have seen a lot of youth movement across the world. So youth activism and civic engagement is critical to saving the planet currently. Because we are running out of time, so we need an urgent problem posed for immediate actions. And nowadays, globally, youth people are leading this kind of organization. It's going to be another good opportunity for us. When we look at the threats quickly, we have urgency, like this is the most important one because levels have already increased by about 50% since the pre-industrial era, with billions of tons of more being released each year. So global warming has already passed the point where it is beginning to have a catastrophic impact in some localities. So major policy changes need to be implemented very soon, very quickly. That's why we have to be urgent on this issue. Another threats will be inactivism, technology, fossil fuel lobby, distributional politics, targeting of climate activities, multi-sector governance, financial aspects, security aspects, absence of clear-cut policies, poor condition between institutions working in climate change, and migration of local experts, especially from east to west, is another threat for this kind of policies. So when we look at in general, we have, I try to summarize some strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats on climate change politics. So if you want to get rid of or mitigate the consequences of climate change, we have to work together. We have to work smart, and it's all in our hands. So if you want to save our world, we need to take action. So thank you very much. That's all from me. I hope I finished it on time.
Yes, thank you so much, Emrah. It was really, time constraints is really something that we also need to talk here today. But thank you so much. It was right on timing. So with no further ado, I will now give the floor, the mic, the internet to Saif, who will now be presenting on transnational surrogacy migration in Eurasia, expansion in Global South. Saif comes from Gauhati University. And thank you again for being here. I'll give you 12 minutes, please.
Well, a very good afternoon, everyone. I am Saif Rasul Khan. I'm from India, and I am currently working as an assistant professor. I'm also a doctoral scholar from India. At the outset, I just wish to put forward an apology. Actually, I'm not in the best state of mind. My father had a major heart problem yesterday. He underwent a major cardiac operation last night. So I might fall short in my presentation, and I apologize for that in advance.
We are sorry to hear that. All the best.
Thank you so much. So the topic of my presentation, which I've titled as Transnational Surrogacy, Movements in Eurasia, Expansion in Global South. I'm essentially looking at it from a perspective of the doctoral scholar that I am. This is part of my thesis work. And I'm looking at surrogacy, particularly commercial surrogacy, and how that has been tackled by different countries around the world, wherever commercial surrogacy is developed in a very prominent fashion. And what has been interesting is the movements that have taken place in terms of the transnational surrogacy, commercial surrogacy in general within the broader term, and particularly within the countries of Global South and specifically Asian countries. So I'll be providing a brief analysis of that. So the areas that will be covered are as follows. Just a brief meaning of what is surrogacy, what is the nature of surrogacy, the European and the Asian perspectives of surrogacy, what is the attitude and perception, which has been a very interesting observation that I have seen in terms of my research. The movements of surrogacy from global north to global south, and even within global south, a lot of change and movements have taken place. Legal aspects, of course, particularly related to India and a comparative analysis. What can be the future perspective and certain conclusions on my part at this preliminary stage. So when we talk about surrogacy, for those who are unaware, perhaps everybody knows what is surrogacy nevertheless. Surrogacy is a form of a third-party reproduction. It's a form of assisted reproduction where a woman called a surrogate is employed basically by the intended couple for the purpose of giving birth to the child. So she is implanted with the embryo, either of the intended couple or by donor. So it involves multiple persons in the transaction, and a lot of medical processes are also required to undergo the process of surrogacy. Surrogacy can be essentially broadly divided into two types. There's traditional surrogacy and there is gestational surrogacy. Traditional surrogacy is one where the surrogate's own egg is used. So she has a genetic connection with the baby that will be produced at the end of the pregnancy term. And gestational is one where she's simply implanted with the embryo. As far as the economic perspective is concerned, there are two types of surrogacy that have developed globally. One is the altruistic model, and the second is a commercial model. And why the commercial model has become very prominent is because of the large-scale business attitude with which surrogacy has been carried out around the world. It has become a very important part and element of the health sector. There are reproductive markets today. It's approximately a $2 billion US dollar industry today around the world. That was a figure of around 5-10 years back. So it must be a much bigger number today. And it has developed in and around the world. Every country has virtually seen the consequences of what can commercial surrogacy result in. So within that area, I will be limiting my presentation. So when we look at the European and the Asian perspectives, we have to understand that surrogacy as a practice within the specifics of the medical process, particularly developed in the Western countries, US and UK, leading the methods of developing the medical side of it. Slowly and steadily, clinics, medical experts started to realize how lucrative and how fruitful this can be, and therefore slowly and steadily started to commercialize it. In US, of course, commercial surrogacy is permitted in certain states. Within the US, being a federal country, there's a lot of variations between the countries with surrogacy-friendly and not friendly states. In UK, there's a different perspective. But when we look at the Western idea, the Western perspective of surrogacy is largely around the idea that the surrogate is providing life. And therefore, that is the idea with which surrogacy is concluded there. When we look at the European countries, it's a mixed bag. There are certain countries which permit surrogacy and certain countries which do not. And when you analyze these two, you will see that religion and the social stratification of that particular country has a major role to play. Countries which are more leaning towards religion or which have a religious influence tend to ban this practice in its entirety, particularly like, for example, Italy, Spain, etc. And countries which are far more liberal in their perspective and religion-wise as well, there's not much influence, they have allowed it, like, for example, the UK, Ireland, Denmark, and Belgium. In UK, of course, it's a very interesting model and a model which I've studied very in depth. It's an altruistic model, but it's a very interesting model in the sense that they have created a certain amount to be given to the surrogate within the term of quote unquote reasonable payment. Whether that can be done and that can be a model that can be used as a global response is something that I will be talking about towards the end of this presentation. When we come to the Asian countries, however, it's a completely different perspective in the sense that surrogacy in the Asian countries came purely as a business venture. Many countries in the South Asian countries, whether that's India, my country, or Thailand, Cambodia, these all developed as purely business ventures where these medical experts and these clinics develop a clear business model by which they would bring in people from outside countries, from countries where surrogacy is not permitted, or for people who are not permitted in those countries, for example, same-sex couples, which was prominent particularly in India at one point in time, even in Thailand. So it was purely a very business model that came into the Asian countries, and therefore the commercialization that took place in the Asian countries was clearly from that perspective of simply earning money through these processes and earning foreign currency through these processes. So India and Thailand are two very prominent countries which have seen a lot of transnational surrogacy arrangements. with a number of foreign couples who came to India, found it cheap, found it of a certain quality, and India being a country which is an English-speaking dominant country, so it became easier for those couples also to engage in such processes in India. So it was a very business model, it was a very commercialized model. Although surrogacy was given for locals, but it was much limited in number than that of foreign couples. So it was a very clear commercial model, particularly in a state called Gujarat in the western part of India. It is a clear business structure where there are systematized organizations who will provide the surrogate, who will provide the medical experts, who will take the medical, and they create it as a reproductive, quote unquote, tourism. So they take the couple to an all India tour and they help them out in the process of going through the process of surrogacy. So the very commercialized model, a very business model, which led to a lot of conflict, which led to a lot of ethical dilemma in the country. And I'll be talking about the Indian perspective in a bit, but more or less now most Asian countries have restricted transnational surrogacy. They have limited it only to their own citizens and locals of their own country. Another very interesting perspective which I came across when I was studying for my thesis was the concept of gift giver versus gift receiver. And this is again a segregation between the Western idea of surrogacy and the Eastern idea of surrogacy. And Eurasian perspective again varies in terms of pure European countries which look at it as a gift giving process whereby the surrogate is gifting life to the intended parents. And when you come to the Asian countries, it becomes a gift receiver in the sense that it is seen as a surrogate is receiving a gift by this intended couple who has come to them for childbirth because of poverty, because of the economic aspect. That a surrogate in India or in Thailand or in Cambodia is surviving on surrogacy for her daily bread and butter, and therefore she should be thankful to the intended couple that they chose her. So there's a clear stark in terms of the attitude and in terms of literature also when surrogacy is discussed from Western scholars as well from Eastern scholars or from the European scholars and the Asian scholars. So it's a very interesting perspective how the entire picture gets converted in terms of the economics of this process. When we talk about movements of surrogacy, and which is a part of the theme of my topic today, that though it developed in the West, it did envelop the entire world, particularly Eastern parts, in which I just told you that it was a very commercialized, very exploitative idea of surrogacy in the Asian countries. And because of the economics, because of lack of development, unemployment of women in these countries, surrogates were easily available, and surrogates through one process of surrogacy from a foreign couple would earn in one pregnancy what she would perhaps earn in an entire year. So for her, it was also a very economically fruitful thing. And in India also, many surrogates survive on a day-to-day basis through this process for their daily bread and butter, for their livelihood. So in India, it's a very complicated situation in terms of whether you can completely ban this process and in turn take away the food of these many surrogates who survive on this for their sole existence. Similarly, the idea was in Cambodia or in Thailand. And with every restriction that was developed, new markets emerged. So at one point in India, through an executive order, transnational surrogacy was ended in 2010, 2012. Then Thailand developed as a very strong market. 2015, Thailand brought a ban on transnational surrogacy. Then all the surrogacy markets shifted from Thailand to neighboring Cambodia. A lot of Thai doctors also went to Cambodia, did the process, and during the process of birth, they would bring her to Thailand and give birth in Thailand because of availability of better medical facilities. Now, Cambodia also brought about a ban through the Ministry of Justice, and then it has now shifted to Laos. So there's a movement in terms of surrogacy as well, and surrogates also move through these processes. So a lot of surrogates from Thailand moved to Cambodia. From Cambodia, now they've moved to Laos. So it has been a process by which a lot of these global south countries are continuously getting affected one after the other, and there's no clear solution in sight. Thailand, it was banned. A lot of underground markets have developed. Cambodia, the surrogates were arrested for engaging in such processes. They have no other source of livelihood, and they were released only with the surety that they will raise the child that they have given birth to. So it adds on to their burden. Similarly, in India, there is no clarity, there is no law right now, so it is still working underground. So global south countries are really struggling to find a solution, effective solution to the idea of commercial surrogacy. And at the same time, they also do recognize that if you bring a ban to it, a complete blanket ban, it may be far more detrimental for these women. And if such underground markets keep developing, it will be far difficult to regulate. So this is a very interesting process that I saw, that with Thailand coming to bank, Cambodia developed, and then from Cambodia, Laos also developed. When we come to the Indian context, since I'm a scholar from India, India has also seen a similar trajectory in terms of a lot of commercial surrogacy, transnational surrogacy being developed. And there was a very prominent case of baby Manji, which was of a Japanese couple. And during the process of surrogacy, the couple got separated. And because of private international law, the child would be given nationality only on the basis of the mother. And the mother was no longer interested in raising the child because she had no genetic relationship to the child. And the father had to struggle to get nationality. And so the child lived for almost 6-7 months in India without any parents in India in the hospital along with the surrogate. After that, the government brought about a ban in transnational surrogacy in India. And currently, the laws are still in process. They are still in the parliament being discussed, debated. Multiple revisions have taken place. But right now, what has been proposed is a complete ban on commercial surrogacy and only altruistic surrogacy, that too only for locals, and only heterosexual couples, and no single men, no same-sex couples, live-in couples are excluded from it. So the law in itself has been developed keeping in mind the socio-religious aspects of India as well. And at the same time, borrowing a lot from the British model, from the UK model. And that is where I bring in that perhaps what is needed and what is the next solution to this. Because whether we look at Ukraine right now, where during the time of COVID, a number of surrogate mothers were left helpless because the parents could not travel to take their children. Similarly, in Georgia as well, the same situation has developed. Whether we look at Cambodia, where the surrogates are arrested and punished for engaging in such processes. Laos has also seen a similar problem with the COVID situation. So what can be the global response to such transnational surrogacy? And perhaps what is needed is a clear legislative framework in every country. There are countries which are operating without a law, including India, which does not have a specific law yet, but it has been being discussed for a long time. So couples do not now take the chance of undergoing surrogacy in India. But there's a need for legal framework in all of these countries. Perhaps what is needed perhaps is a supranational law in terms of a guiding principle, perhaps that can be provided by the United Nations, while ensuring sovereignty of each country decide whether they wish to permit or they wish to decline surrogacy. But if they do, there should be certain specific guidelines that could perhaps be provided to countries to ensure that they do follow through. It's a gray area which cannot have a black and white solution. It's a very complicated situation, and it's a very complex situation because it involves multiple parties. But keeping in mind the altruistic model, perhaps what can be taken as a cue, especially in case of India, is the model which has been developed in UK, where there's a compensation which has been given, a fixed amount of money which cannot go beyond that, so that the surrogate also feels like she has contributed to it. She also earns her financial incentive, while also ensuring that it's not brutally and absolutely commercialized in the sense of it becoming a business activity. So with this, I would like to conclude. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saif. Again, thank you for presenting, especially in these harsh conditions and particular conditions of yours. Wishing all the best to your father. Thank you for keeping with the timing. I now give the floor to Faruk Dundar from the University of Glasgow, who is going to present on an example of the marginality of asylum seekers in literature Hinterland. So, Faruk, thank you so much for being here. I'll give you now 12-14 minutes maximum.
Thanks, thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I think you see my scene, but
yeah, now we see it.
Can you see?
Yeah. Just
okay. That's okay. Today I will tell you about the marginality of asylum seekers in literature, and actually my paper will be based on literature about a novel, Hinterland. And first of all, I will define the migrant asylum seeker and refugee terms. And then I will give you a brief information about Hinterland and the writer. And then I will mention about the problems of the asylum seekers in this novel, and I will conclude my presentation. Let's begin with introduction. Migration is a one-way trip. There is no home to go back to. in this famous quotation, Stuart Hall points to how difficult it is to decide to migrate. When the people migrate from their country to a new country, they inevitably encounter many problems, both in relation to their new country and their home country, because as migrants, they can easily become strangers to both in their home country and in their new country. If the migrant is a child or a teenager, it is obvious that they will experience these problems still more keenly, because the main characters are children or teenagers in this novel Hinterland. And if all migrants lived in a single country named Migrant Land, this is my name for this country, the country would be fifth most crowded country in the world, because there are 263 million international migrants now in the world. Also, there are about 26 million refugees and more than 3 million asylum seekers in the world, and nearly half of the refugee population are female and children below 18 years. As you know, I think you know, the largest refugee and asylum seeker population lives in Turkey, and Syrians are the most crowded refugee and asylum seeker population. Maybe you know these terms, but just I will briefly explain this term, because most people are confused about asylum seeker and refugee terms. An asylum seeker is a person who seeks safety from persecution or serious harm in a country other than his or her own, and awaits a decision on the application for refugee status under relevant international and national instruments. A refugee is someone who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable to, or owing to such fear, is unable to avail himself of the protection of that country. There is a crucial difference between being a refugee and being an asylum seeker. An asylum seeker is a person whose application has not been approved yet, and therefore an asylum seeker is a person who has not gained refugee status yet. However, both terms refer to the same reason for leaving the home country, which is a well-founded fear, as I said in my explanations. Let's begin to book and author. I think you know these iconic pictures, but I think you don't know the stories of Aylan baby. It is the left side of left photograph, the baby, and also these Afghans stories. You don't know the stories of them, their stories. So literature is important at that point. Why is literature important? Because literature is an excellent medium to present and discuss asylum seekers and refugees issues. Like that, the internet, social media, newspapers, radio, and television can reflect their problems shortly. However, few news outlets tell us the whole story of Aylan baby or the Afghans in previous picture, and therefore this kind of news or events can be told in their entirety in literature. Literature can be a most useful source in order to understand asylum seekers and refugees issues in their new countries or in their home countries in some depth, as it provides their experiences through their own perspectives. This is the book, Hinterland, was written by Karolina brothers. In this book, the main characters of the novel are two Afghan brothers whose names are Aryan and Kabir. They are children. At the beginning of the novel, they cross a river, which is also the border between Turkey and Greece. They come to Turkey throughout Iran and Iran from Afghanistan. they escapes from the Taliban. They do not have anything else except their clothes. Their aim is to arrive in London. They have lost their parents in a terrorist attack by Taliban, and the Taliban killed their older brothers in Afghanistan. They give money to smugglers to take them to London. At the end of the novel, we see a tragedy. They go to England in a refrigerated truck. Aryan, one of the brothers, dies in this refrigerated truck because of the cold and the lack of oxygen. Kabir, another brother, makes it to London and begins to attend school in London. This is the author of the book. Caroline Brothers was born in Australia. She is a journalist and she worked for International Herald Tribune and the New York Times. Hinterland was written in 2011 and published in 2012 in the UK. And Hinterland was her first novel. The problems of the characters or marginality of the characters. Aryan and Kabir changed track many times after leaving Afghanistan in order to arrive in London. And as I said before, they died. One of them died in a refrigerated truck at the end of the novel. At the end of the novel, Hamid, another refugee, Afghan refugee or asylum seeker, I can say, Hamid and Kabir are the only people left alive in the truck when they arrive in London. The lack of oxygen kills others, including another brother, Aryan, and Hamid and Kabir sit near the doors, and a little air could enter the truck, and so they can survive in the refrigerated truck. Starvation is another cruel experience for the asylum seekers. In this novel, we see Kabir is very hungry. Aryan gives him a piece of chewing gum, for example, and then Aryan thinks that the explosion of sugar and the illusion of food will trick his stomach for a while. And also we see that they endure many difficulties throughout their journeys to new lands, which will provide them with happiness. At least they think like that. And the narrator, the author, shows that the main characters of the novel make a great effort in order to achieve their objectives. Their objectives is, their objective is arriving in London and attending school. They try to overcome all difficulties to arrive in their imagined heavenly country, the United Kingdom. And we see that they do not give up their aims. They do not have anything except their hopes. And but Aryan and Kabir endure every challenge in order to arrive in London. Actually, in this novel, we are given insight into Aryan's memories of Afghanistan, and we have a greater understanding of why Aryan and Kabir make the journey from Tabil to London. Aryan has nightmares about his memories in Afghanistan because of the Taliban. And for example, now the Taliban again occupied the country, Afghanistan. Now we don't know what will happen in the future, but we know what happened in the past with this kind of novels. And Aryan, for example, dreams of a rocket attack on the market in the novel, or he imagines a cloud of dust, legs, blood, and many things, many bad things actually. Aryan also remembers his memories in Afghanistan with his father, because his father killed by Taliban, and he remembers the day the Taliban came, and there are men with dark turbans. His father sends Aryan Kabir and his mother to Iran. But they live in Iran for 4 years. After 4 years, the UN reports that Afghanistan is safe and they return to Afghanistan, but the danger is continuing in Afghanistan. For this reason, despite the assurance of safety, their mother is killed by Taliban, and Kabir and Aryan flee to Iran in order to obtain their dream of living in England. The author tells us a story on the way to London, and we see Kabir's wish become real by his attending school in London, and Aryan died at the last part of the journey. After arriving in London, he starts a new life. On the one hand, he is very sad because of his brother's death, but now he is in London and he has plans for his future. At the end of this novel, we see that he will look for happiness in London, but we don't know what happened after. In conclusion, I can say that the author of Hinterland is an Australian journalist who has reported on refugees and asylum seekers across the world. She considers their experiences both realistically and sympathetically. She also lived in the UK, and she knows the UK and how they respond to asylum seekers, or how UK citizens or how the UK government respond to asylum seekers. She knows this, and for this reason she underlines that asylum seekers desire to live in the UK because of its safety and comfort. Also, we see that the only aim of the asylum seekers is arriving in London. In this novel, the characters have a small wish that they want to attend school in London, and we see many countries and cities in this novel, and the author praises England, but sometimes the author criticizes other countries like Turkey, Iran, and Greece. The authors aim by showing their experiences in these countries and difficulties on the way seems to be that readers should approach asylum seekers sympathetically. Also, this is important point, I think. The characters in this novel are sorry for being Afghan, and also we see this kind of things nowadays. And many Afghans are sorry for being Afghan or living in that time. Aryan's answer to Kabir's question about whether they are Afghans explain this issue. Aryan thinks that being Egyptian, American, and Eskimo is better than being Afghan. Also, he thinks that if they had not been Afghans, they wouldn't have been on the way to London. That this is my conclusion. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Faruk, for a very interesting and different approach to this topic. I will now give the floor to Karolina Baraniak. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your names, from the University of Wrocław in Poland. We now go from Europe to Europe, from the Cold War to the nuclear sharing, the nuclear deterrence in Poland. Karolina, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours. Is Karolina here? Yeah, she's.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous. I hope that you can hear me.
We hear you very well.
Oh, that's great.
Although we don't see you.
I apologize for not turning on my camera, but I have very unstable internet connection.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this panel, and let me now move on my presentation. I will share my screen. 1 minute. Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, Professor Fonseca. So I will start. In the early 90s.
Can you just put on a full screen mode? It's easier so that we can.
Yes, of course. Wait.
Great, that's great. Beautiful pictures. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So, in the early 1960s, the Polish armed forces included Soviet AK-11 tactical operational missiles and 3 R-10 tactical missiles. Due to their low accuracy, they could only be effectively used as carriers for 3 and 40 nuclear warheads. 12 of the MiG-21 PMFM aircraft delivered to Poland were also adapted to carry nuclear weapons. In the mid-1960s, Polish-Soviet talks began, the result of which was a program codenamed Wisła. In English, it's Vistula. As a part of it, the Polish side built 3 nuclear weapons storage facilities on the basis of Soviet plans. They were located in the vicinity of Polborg near Białogard, Brzeźnica, Kolonia near Jastrowie, and Templewa near Trzemeszno-Lubuskie in eastern Poland. Each of these depots was equipped with 2 nuclear weapons depots. According to initial plans, the 178 nuclear warheads were to be stored there, carried out by the AK-11 and 3 R-10 missiles. The construction of the depots began in 1967 and was completed in January 1970. Then the depots were handed over to the northern groups of Soviet forces, which was to take care of the loads until they were handed over to the Polish army, which was to take place after the outbreak of the NATO-Warsaw Pact conflict. Each of these depots occupied nearly 200 hectares and had a staff of about 120 soldiers and 30 officers. According to the data disclosed in the mid-1980s, they stored 14 warheads with a capacity of 500 kilotons, 83 warheads with the capacity of 10 kilotons, 2 bombs with a capacity of 200 kilotons, and 24 bombs with a capacity of 15 kilotons. In the mid-1970s, an additional granite nuclear weapons storage facility was built in each depot. The reason for the expansion of the trains is unknown. It is possible that this was related to the appearance of new nuclear weapons carriers in the armament of the Polish People's Army, such as Su-20, MiG-23, MiG-21Bs, and Su-22 planes. Preparations were made for its introduction to the 3rd Artillery Brigade in Biedrusko in eastern Poland, but the economic crisis of the Polish People's Republic in the late 1980s made it impossible to introduce the set to this front unit of the new technical thought, despite the training of specialists in the USSR to operate the above-mentioned equipment. In addition to the nuclear weapons intended for the Polish armed forces, there were a number of nuclear weapons storage facilities for the northern group of Soviet forces in Poland. It was a warehouse near Szprotawa in western Poland, the so-called monolith type, about 40 nuclear bombs, as well as the warheads for air missiles. Granite type facilities located at the airports in Chojna and Bagić were intended for the Soviet 239 Fighter Aviation Division and Kluczewo in the district of Stargard in the northern Poland. As a result of the large number of nuclear charges being stored in the territory of the Polish People's Republic, and the fact that Poland was conducting nuclear research, NATO qualified the country as having an active program on nuclear weapons research. This research began in the early 1960s with the main goal of bringing about a nuclear reaction by the end of the decade. In the later 1960s, it was possible to achieve a controlled nuclear fission reaction. Poland ratified the NPT on June 12, 1969. In the 1970s, a neutron fusion thermonuclear reaction was obtained by concentric shock waves. In the 1980s, research focused on the development and analysis of micronuclear reactions during the utilization of uranium-235 isotope. After the collapse of the Warsaw Pact and the fall of communism, nuclear research was taken over by the Institute of Atomic Energy. Poland had 2 nuclear reactors at the Institute for Nuclear Research in Otwock, now is the Institute of Atomic Energy, named Eva and Maria. You can see it on this slide. In 1995, the Eva reactor was shut down due to the lack of uranium. Nuclear research continued in the Maria reactor for non-military purposes. As a part of agreement between the United States and Poland, enriched uranium was shipped to the secure nuclear depot in Russia on August 10, 2006. At the beginning of May 2020, Rolf Munitzer, the person in the top left corner, head of the SPD faction in the Bundestag, spoke in favor of the withdrawal of American nuclear weapons from Germany and the resignation from participation in the NATO nuclear sharing program, which provides for the transfer of American warheads by aircraft of allied states. In response, the US ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, man in the lower left corner, said that threats to peace in Europe were not a thing of the past, as some said. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the accumulation by Russia and of new missiles capable of carrying nuclear loads on the periphery of Europe, now new capabilities of China, North Korea, and other countries show that the threat exists, he said, and expressed the opinion that instead of weakening the solidarity that underpins NATO nuclear deterrence, Germany should maintain its commitments to its allies, but continues to invest in the tactical nuclear weapons sharing program. If Germany wants to reduce its nuclear potential and weaken NATO, perhaps Poland, which honestly fulfills its obligation, understand the risk and lies on NATO's eastern flank, could accept this potential at home, wrote Georgia Moschbacher, the woman in the top right corner, then the US ambassador to Poland. To these words refers Deputy Minister of Defense Tomasz Szatkowski, man in the lower right corner, who was the first representative of government to openly state that analyses are underway and concrete steps are being considered for Poland's possible accession to the NATO nuclear sharing program. The words of the Deputy Minister met with harsh criticism from the opposition, which considered them irresponsible. The Ministry of National Defense quickly stated that there were no specific actions to bring nuclear weapons to Polish territory, but it was not ruled out that such an option was considered. As a possible decision on some form of Poland's participation in the agreement would, of course, have to be agreed at the political level, both domestically and in allied relations, the ministry said. It can be argued whether the statement of Minister Szatkowski belongs to the skillful and the diplomatic category, because, as many argue, it may not be necessary to inform about the matters of the highest importance for the security of the country on television, especially about the issues of nuclear weapons. Treat. As a rule, however, it was not an absurd, as some critics would like to say. In theory, Poland's participation in the NATO nuclear sharing system is still possible. And the problem is that the willingness of the rest of the alliance countries, especially the US, to move tactical nuclear weapons to the Vistula River is negligible. And this attitude should not be expected to change anytime soon. Rather, since the end of the Cold War, NATO has been wondering how to properly justify leaving the remnants of the US arsenal in Europe, and many experts and analysts have openly criticized keeping the nuclear sharing program alive as a relic of the past. Another issue would be the need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to adapt one of the Polish air bases for the safe storage of nuclear weapons. This would require the construction of additional reinforced bunkers for airplanes with some special shelters for bombs hidden in the ground, and the entire system of their protection and servicing. For the Americans, the military benefits of shifting nuclear weapons under the watchful eye of the Russians would be also doubtful, as this would make it easier to attack these charges by surprise. Therefore, regardless of the public statements of politicians or the arguments of the experts, the vision of appearance of allied nuclear weapons on Polish territory remains distant. It seems more probable that the Polish F-16s, which we adapted to carry it, but this is probably favored by talks in the privacy of NATO or Pentagon headquarters, rather than public consideration of this issue by decision makers on television. And to sum up, it is precisely politics that makes the chance of appearance of nuclear weapons in Poland negligible. Despite Russians openly adopting a much more aggressive course in its relation with its neighbors and the outbreak of the war near Polish borders, there is no consensus in NATO about moving even a few thousand soldiers to the east. In the name of not engaging in the relation with Russia, the alliance is making various ploys, sending its troops to Poland for long maneuvers, so as not to place them here permanently. The most advanced step is the deployment by Americans in Poland of symbolic stocks of weapons and anti-missile shield system. In the face of such an attitude, it is difficult to imagine that NATO suddenly accept the idea of moving nuclear weapons to the east. Weapons of mass destruction in Poland would be something that would surely cause fury in the Kremlin. In Warsaw, perhaps no one would really care about it, but in Berlin, Paris, or Rome, surely yes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Karolina. Do you hear us? Yeah. Thank you so much, Karolina, for also keeping with the timing, which is very hard. But you did very well. So thank you so much again. I will now give the floor to Hyungsoo Woo. Very sorry if I mispronounce your name, from the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. This presentation will be on public opinion towards immigration and immigrants in Korea. Hyungsoo, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will spend 10 minutes to present.
Okay, that's perfect.
Papers.
So that we have.
And, well, thanks for giving me this great opportunity to present my paper. And now I share the screen. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Can't see. No.
Nope, you can't. Oh. Okay. Can you see it?
Okay, no, now we see
Okay.
it. Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
So this paper is about Koreans' public opinion toward immigration and immigrants. I am still in the process of developing arguments and interpretation of results. It would be great to have some comments. And then here it's motivation for this study. So Korea is an unusual destination of immigrants, even for the refugees, during a series of global refugee crises after the Arab Springs and the recent fall of Afghanistan to Taliban. Only a few hundred of Yemenis or Syrians or Afghans came to Korea. And yet there is a lot of heated debates on hosting these refugees. Unlike these refugee issues, there are actually significant increase in the volume of immigrants in Korea. Thus, immigration-related issues triggered heated debates in Korean society. So we try to make a contribution to the study of immigration attitudes and immigration policy by looking at the case of non-Western countries. So first, I'll try to give you a background on pull factors of immigration to Korean society. Particularly, we try to explain how inherent economic and demographic changes in Korean society led the influx of large migrants. So First, the economic factor. Korea has shown the robust economic growth over the past 50 years, except for the period of 1996 and 97 East Asian financial crisis. And with a robust growth and its economic structure transformed from agricultural to manufacturing and service-oriented industries over last 40 years. This economic structure change and development could be possible thanks to highly educated labor forces, along with a government-led economic policies. As you can see, by 2010, its a tertiary educational enrollment rate is skyrocketed and by 70%. In the process of economic development, structure change and development, one of the particularities in Korean economy is led by large business conglomerates, so-called 재벌. You might be familiar with names like Samsung or Hyundai or LG. These are the three major conglomerates in South Korea. So these large business groups offered better wages and welfares, which led the labor market became bifurcated. So there is a large business conglomerates and small SMEs. So in this bifurcated labor market, people with a higher education wants to find a job in large business conglomerates. Therefore, there are labor shortage in the SMEs, and not to mention in the agricultural sector. So Korean government introduced the industrial training program, which is similar to guest worker program in Germany or France after World War II, with a less developed Southeast Asian or Central Asian countries in order to mitigate the labor shortage issue in those SMEs. Later, this industrial training program became an employee permit system. So the other intrinsic social factor to trigger the influx of immigrants is a demographic structural change in Korea. Korean society is one of the fast aging society with a very low fertility rate. So 2009, it was 1.15. 2021, right now it's a 0.8. So people doesn't want to have a baby. So furthermore, there was a strong son preference in rural area, which led sex ratio imbalance in those regions. Men in rural area couldn't find brides in Korea and to begin to look for their brides in outside the country. So these are the typical foreign brides nationalities in Korea. And as a consequence, two major migrants groups in Korea are labor and marriage migrants. In the following few cartographs can give you a general picture of migrant population in Korea. At county level, the highest total registered population surged from 6% to 12%. And if you just look at the capital, Seoul, at borough level, the highest total population is almost tripled from 2003 to 2013. With this background, we try to examine what determines Koreans' attitude toward immigration and immigrants. So we implemented a standard set of hypotheses from widely accepted literature and public opinion toward immigration and immigrants. The first set of hypotheses are based on the labor market competition theories. It tells that natives' attitude towards the immigration and immigrants differ based on their educational level, jobs prestige, their current employment states, and level of presence of immigrants in their neighborhood. And then we created two additional hypotheses based on egotropic and sociotropic voting theory. So, which is individuals who express negative assessments of the present economy circumstances will be more likely to oppose the liberal immigration policy, and individuals who expresses negative assessments of future economic situation will be more likely to oppose the liberal immigration policy. The next set of hypotheses are based on the contact theory and hierarchical citizenship. This figure shows where the multicultural minority groups are situated in a Korean society. Then, using the CASTLE's international hierarchies of citizenship, I created a migrant nationality variable based on the different developmental level of a migrant's country of origin. Then, based on contact and hierarchical nationhood theory, we hypothesized Koreans' attitude toward immigration based on the migrant's profile and migrant's nationality, respectively. In the background section, we have pointed out that two major groups of migrants are labor and marriage migrants. Along with these two migrant groups, a special migrant group exists. This is the Chinese overseas Koreans, so-called 조선족. They have Chinese nationality, but have special immigrant status because they are Korean descendants from Korean autonomous prefecture in China. Therefore, they know Korean culture and language, and thus Korean government grants a special work permit status. So based on this specific group, I created two hypotheses. Individuals who living in the region where the presence of Chinese overseas Korean is high are more likely to oppose the liberal immigration policy. Then with regard to the migration nationality, individuals who live in a region where the presence of migrants from less developed countries is higher are more likely to oppose the liberal immigration policy. So I'm using a two data set. The principal source is the National Identity Module 2 and 3 from International Social Survey, the social survey programs, and borrow level data from Korean Statistical Information System furnishes the contextual information about unemployment rate, total percentage of foreign population, and composition of foreign nationalities and type of visa issued to foreign nationals in each respondent's residential environment. So methodology, I'm using well, dependent variable is the measure Koreans' attitude toward the immigration policy. We create the three categories: increase, remain the same as it is, and decreases. The notable change between 2003 and 2013 is the increase of the remain the same as it is, and decrease in both categories, increased and decreased categories. So methodology, we use the generalized ordered logic model because often the ordered dependent variable doesn't meet the proportional order assumption. Then I will briefly present the output. Although our model includes the control variables such as age, gender, generation, religious affiliation, left, right, political spectrum, we present a summary of key variables of the hypothesis. So we drive our hypothesis from standard public opinion on immigration literature across the most of OECD country. The question is that Korea, never been a colonial power, but once been a colony, differs from other OECD countries in determining their attitude towards immigration and immigrants. The results from the testing economic self-economic interest theory with the Korean data concurs with the results of other development OECD countries. So if you have a higher education, you are less likely opposed to restrictive immigration policy. If your job is high skilled and white collar, you are less likely to have a preference on restrictive immigration policy. And the future economic perspective, if you have a pessimistic, you will have a restrictive, you prefer the restrictive policy. And if you're satisfied with your current economic situation, if the signs are correct, but it doesn't have any statistical significance. For this table, you can see that this plus and minus signs represent the expected sign of estimate coefficients. And then this OX marks is O is statistically significant and X is not statistically significant. So if you look at it, it's concord with most of OECD literatures. And then with regard to the hierarchical nationhood hypothesis, the estimated, this is this part, migrants' nationality. The estimate coefficients are not statistically significant for the developed Asian countries, which are the Taiwan and Japan. And the sign of estimated coefficients for the less developed Asian countries are negative because they are mostly labor migrants, and Koreans think they are essential to the Korean society. And then if you look at the Chinese and Chinese overseas Koreans, they have a very negative, they want to restrictive them to come into Korea. So, is it? I'm sorry, I'm a bit lost of time tracking.
Yeah, you should finish in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
So you still have a couple of minutes. To,
so
to conclude.
there is a migrant profile. So if you are it's not statistically significant for the labor and marriage migrants, but for the Chinese overseas Koreans, Koreans prefer to impose a restrictive immigration policy for them. So this somewhat hostile attitude toward the Chinese and Chinese overseas Koreans is based on threat, because those people can speak Korean and know the culture. So Koreans think they are perfect substitute for the low skilled laborers. So they feel threat. So that's the reason why the research show that native prefers a restrictive immigration policy when there is a higher presence of Chinese or Chinese overseas Koreans. Takeaway point of this paper is still under development, but we can point out that the Korean prefer the more restrictionist immigration policy when the presence of Chinese overseas Korean and Chinese. And the other economic self-interest theory concurs with the results of other OECD countries. So I will stop here, and thanks for listening. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Hyungsoo. We now have 10 minutes more or less to our Q&A period. I would like to remind you that you can use the functionality of raise your hand, and then I will give you the word. Hyungsoo, would you mind just stop? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sorry.
So you can ask questions directly here through video and microphone. If you just raise your hand, or you
the screen. How can
no, it's
I do
okay.
that?
It's already stopped the screen.
Oh, is it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thanks.
And or you can write your questions on the chat, and the host will send them to me, and I will read them out loud. So we've had a set of 5 papers, very different in themselves, but actually addressing the topic of our panel, which is global challenges, global problems. Let me just remind me. Global phenomenon requires a global response, and indeed we have had this wonderful set of papers. We have begun with Emrah, who made a SWOT analysis of climate changes and climate issues, which is, we are all dealing with SWOT analysis all over our our work. So it is indeed an interesting exercise. Then we had Saif, who is no longer here, but he I don't know if you have seen, he asked if anyone wants to pose any questions or address his presentation, he has sent his email, so feel free to contact him and further discuss with him his paper. Then we had Faruk presenting this perspective of asylum seekers in the literature work Hinterland, which was also different but interesting way to approach the topic. Then we had Karolina, who presented us the challenges of nuclear deterrence in Poland, and we finished with Hyungsoo and public policies towards immigration, public opinion towards immigration and immigrants in Korea. So we had very challenging topics addressing very poignant themes: migration and climate change and nuclear deterrence and refugees and asylum seekers. So I would like to ask you to bring your questions to the floor. Okay, the speakers can also pose questions to themselves and to each other. Not to themselves would be a little strange, but to each other. So, okay, I will take advantage of my own position as a moderator, and I will pose a question to Faruk. I was wondering, what was the impact that this work Hinterland had within the British literature and the way the author portrays this refugee and this challenges to asylum seekers. What was the impact of this work?
Actually, this fact. Thanks for the question. This is the only question from you to me. Actually, this novel is important because this novel was written a journalist, and Caroline Brothers was written about refugees and asylum seekers and migrants, international migrants, and so the scholars about this book think that maybe this kind of works written by journalists or refugees or the people who are inside the problem mainly can reflect the issues of refugees better than the people outside of the context. So this is important, and also as I said in my presentation, we know the news about Afghans, for example. Now Taliban occupied Afghanistan, and then we saw, or now still we are seeing many tragedies in Afghanistan. And when you read this book, Hinterland, you can maybe feel their emotions deeply inside. This is the importance of the book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I was very curious, and I will try to read it because I was very curious about what that experience is. So, has anyone?
Thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? Any other? So, okay, let's take this advantage to finish our panel. I wish to thank you all for being here, to the speakers for presenting them papers and being so respective of time constraints. We now have quite a comfortable break until the keynote speaker of 11:30. It will be Professor Sandra Fernandes presenting on Russia and Eurasia, One Concept, Multiple Applications, which should be a very interesting presentation. I will meet you all on the closing session when I will be back here again. So I wish you a good afternoon and good work, and see you soon. Thank you all for being here. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anna. Bye.